October is finally over. Everyone thought October was going to be a great month in crypto, myself included, but unfortunately it was the complete opposite. We actually have a red October when it comes to Bitcoin and Ethereum. But the question is now, we are into November. What could we expect in November? We're going to take a look at a few catalysts that are happening and what I believe Bitcoin and altcoins are going to do in November. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, and let's talk about it. Bitcoin closed the month of October around $110,000. And if we take a look at these monthly candles, it's now been about 4 months. We're into the 5th month where Bitcoin has been above 100,000, but been, stuck in this range of 100,000 all the way to roughly 126,000. We've made a few all-time highs throughout the last few months, but ever since then, it seems that Bitcoin is kind of exhausted and the sentiment has turned completely more bearish than bullish. Now, if we take a look at this on a weekly chart, we've been, saying this from the very beginning. We're still in a macro uptrend for Bitcoin. Bitcoin's price is getting closer to that 50-week moving average, which is this blue line here. And time again in the bull market, we have seen Bitcoin bounce off of these levels as it has approached its 50-week moving average. And right now, at the time we're recording this, the 50-week moving average is just around 103,000. So to me, we're not done with Bitcoin unless it goes below that 50-week moving average and it really, starts descending afterwards. Because if you look at the 2021 bull market, what happened when Bitcoin actually fell below the 50-week moving average, it basically signaled that that was the end of the bull market. You can see it held support right here on the 50-week moving average, came all the way back up, dropped again to the 50-week moving average, made the all-time high, and then we had, a downside to Bitcoin. It basically hovered around the 50-week moving average for a few weeks and then it fell below it, tried to come back to it, found resistance on it, and then boom, you're into your bear market. So again, we're not seeing that just yet. So I am remaining, positive on Bitcoin. But again, you have to be wary that anything could happen and you have to be looking at the price of Bitcoin. Now, with that said, as we saw, the sentiment right now is nowhere near euphoria. We haven't really been in, extreme greed for quite some time. If we look at it right now, we are in fear. If I show you the last time we were in actual extreme greed, it goes back to the December/November 2024 run that we had on Bitcoin as well as altcoins. Ever since that point on, we haven't seen a whole lot of euphoria in the markets. We did see a nice run in August for Ethereum, but in terms of the fear and greed index back in August, we were in the greed area and we were not in the euphoria stage. Now, if we take a look at Bitcoin monthly returns, as we said, October was the 3rd month in Bitcoin's history here that we've saw a red October. And that, is very mind-boggling because, of course, everybody and their dogs thought we were going to get a nice October, especially with the catalysts that were all upcoming. And we see a negative 3.7% month with the average being about plus 20% for Bitcoin. Now, if you look at this and you look at November's statistics, you can see that we have only 4 red months for November in the history of Bitcoin. And on average, it goes up 42% in November. But that is likely skewed because of 2013, where it went up 450%. We can probably do the average of the remaining here and likely be around, 15 to 20%, similar to October, because as a whole, Q4 of a post-halving year is very bullish, but we haven't seen it just yet. We saw a red October. If we, go with statistics, just like we did with October, November should theoretically be a bullish month for Bitcoin. Now, if we do the same thing for Ethereum, Ethereum again in November is more bullish than bearish. We can see we have an average of 7% gains on Ethereum in November. And again, December is another bullish month. So that's what we have in terms of historical performance for Bitcoin and Ethereum. But I want to share with you guys a few of my thoughts, because if we take a look at how the markets are currently doing, and I know most of us are holding altcoins and we're waiting for altcoins to go crazy, and altcoins are just not doing that. They're basically saying, yeah, right, we're not going up. And I know it sucks. I'm in the same boat as you. But if we take a look at what's happening right now in the markets, it's now the 8th consecutive week that Bitcoin dominance is going up. And if we take a look at this, we had a bottom of Bitcoin dominance back in the middle/beginning of September. And ever since then, Bitcoin dominance has gone from 57% to 60% and has continued going up, thus having altcoins continue to bleed. Because if we take a look at this chart here, which basically compares altcoins to your Bitcoin pairs, what we've seen is since September, the middle or beginning of September, altcoins have continued to fall against Bitcoin. This is this, pattern here of 8 weeks just continuing to go down against Bitcoin. And that is, why sentiment, in my opinion, is so low, because everybody is holding altcoins and waiting for altcoins to go crazy, but we're just not getting that because altcoins are still bleeding against Bitcoin, and Bitcoin dominance is continuing to go up higher. So if we take a look at just, the totality of this chart, and we see what could potentially happen to altcoins in November, well, again, we are still in a macro downtrend for altcoins versus Bitcoin. So are altcoins going to continue to bleed against Bitcoin all throughout November and, reach the bottom of 0.25, which we've kind of been waiting for, which has been the bottom in 2019 when the Fed stopped quantitative tightening? This is when this relationship bottomed. We know that the Fed is ending quantitative tightening in December, the 1st of December. So are, altcoins going to continue bleeding all throughout November and then bottom in December and hopefully bounce back? Is Bitcoin dominance going to continue higher in November? That, in my opinion, is likely what may happen. And again, you have to pay attention to Bitcoin dominance because we're waiting for Bitcoin dominance to drop to really see that rotation of liquidity into altcoins. We haven't seen that yet. What we saw in 2024, this is, when we had a little bit of euphoria in the markets, we had Bitcoin dominance drop from 61.5% all the way to roughly 54%. This move here was a much bigger move on altcoins than the move we just had in August, because this was basically Ethereum gaining dominance on Bitcoin and outperforming altcoins more than the move we saw in December. So if we show you that chart that tells us exactly that, well, you can see that Bitcoin dominance started dropping in November of 2024. If we go on the chart of altcoins versus Ethereum and we go to November 2024, we're right around here. And this basically shows us that altcoins are outperforming ETH all the way up until April. Now, of course, their USD valuations were not doing so great once we hit the new year in 2025, but if you take altcoins versus Ethereum, they were doing better than Ethereum all the way till April 25th. That's when ETH Bitcoin bottomed. And then your next move is ETH outperforming altcoins from April all the way to Ethereum reaching a new all-time high in August. And that is your second move here, where ETH is gaining dominance against Bitcoin. And if I show you the ETH Bitcoin chart, that is exactly what we have seen from April all the way to the middle of August. Now, with all of that being said, what does this mean for altcoins? Well, for me personally, you have to start seeing Bitcoin to go higher, for Ethereum to go higher, and for altcoins to then go higher. The good thing is ETH Bitcoin is still making higher lows, But the sad thing is ETH Bitcoin has been, going down ever since the middle of August. And we have basically 2 months here, or 2.5 months of ETH Bitcoin slowly going down, which means that ETH is losing dominance to Bitcoin. Bitcoin dominance is going up, and altcoins are continuing to bleed. It's been a very long 2.5 months of absolutely nothing, unfortunately, in the markets, even though we've had some decent catalysts. But looking at this on, the macro scale of things, we've bottomed in April. We made a new higher low in June, a new higher low in July, and we're just waiting for this to bottom out so that ETH Bitcoin can go back up. ETH can then, start pushing back to that $5,000 level, and then altcoins could follow suit. But it is going to depend on Bitcoin, because Ethereum's probably not going to reach $5,000 if Bitcoin goes to 100,000. If Bitcoin drops 10%, there's no way ETH is going up, 20%. And again, if Bitcoin drops and ETH drops, your altcoins are going to do the same thing and drop once more. So it is going to be very important to pay attention to Bitcoin dominance in November, because this is the last month of quantitative tightening. And if we take a look at what happened to Bitcoin dominance, the last time the Fed ended quantitative tightening, well, it happened in September, as we've said. And if you look at Bitcoin dominance here, it actually topped at roughly, 73% when the Fed ended quantitative tightening. That is something that could happen this time again, where we have another month of bullishness for Bitcoin dominance because the Fed is ending quantitative tightening on December 1st. If that's the case, that could signal a top for Bitcoin dominance, and that would probably make Bitcoin hit a new all-time high, hopefully. And then we can have, Bitcoin dominance drop. It did go back to a new high in 2021 after the Fed ended quantitative tightening. So that is a little bit of a difference in this cycle than we may not see this cycle around. But again, going with that thesis that Bitcoin dominance topped at the same time as the Fed ended quantitative tightening could mean that Bitcoin dominance continues to dominate in November. ETH catches up to Bitcoin in December, and then altcoins could catch up to ETH should ETH make a new all-time high in December. Now, again, this is completely speculative. I know that, we've been saying we're waiting for this, but the cycle has been playing out this way where Bitcoin has been the one that has made all-time highs time and time again. ETH has made its all-time high in August, and altcoins, outside of a few like BNB, Solana, and others, have made some all-time highs, but generally speaking, altcoins have been absolutely horrible. But I do think that we do have one final chance in November and December, which is why I'm not freaking out just yet, and which is why Bitcoin, in the macro sense, is still in this bull market. Now, if you want to look at sentiment and what people are searching, another thing that I'm looking at is Google Trends. How many people are searching for crypto term? You can see that, we did peak back in August, which is when Ethereum made a new all-time high. Bitcoin was also near all-time highs. But ever since then, September, we've dropped back down. October, we've dropped back down. And we're dropping yet again in November. So we did see the peak in 2017 and we saw the peak in 2021. Could this be the peak of 2025? I'm going to leave that up to you guys. Or are we going to see another peak in interest later on in November or December? If you look at Bitcoin, we have, the peak of 2017. We have a lower peak in 2021 in terms of interest or searches on Bitcoin. And then we do have another peak in August and another peak in November 2024, where, people were coming back to look at Bitcoin, but again, diminishing interest, yet again, diminishing interest. Let me know what you guys think about that. Are we going to see a new all-time high on Bitcoin, which is going to push searches back to some of the higher levels? And altcoins, we've seen a peak of 2027, a peak of 2021, and a massive peak in August 2025, because in August 2025, Ethereum was making new all-time highs, and the narrative back then was that the liquidity would make its way to altcoins, but instead it actually made its way back into Bitcoin, which is why Bitcoin dominance has gone back up from August, and altcoins have continued to bleed against Bitcoin. And last but not least, we also know that the Fed is potentially going to cut rates in December. Just last week, we had Jerome Powell say it's going to depend on the data that we get to see whether or not we're going to do a cut in December. Right now, the chances are at 70% of a 0.25 basis cut point in December, which is good. But I do think we're absolutely going to need to have that cut, and we're also going to have to see quantitative tightening really come to an end so that we can potentially get better liquidity conditions in the month of December. Because if we don't get this interest rate cut, there's likely going to be even more bearishness in the market. Even though QT ends, that could be a tell-all sign that the Fed is happy with the current economy in the States, balancing inflation and the labor markets. So again, that is a little too early to tell, but do pay attention to that because December is going to be a very interesting month as well. So those are my thoughts for November. For December, I do think there's likely going to be more downside pressure to altcoins, but I do think that there is going to be a chance in time that if Bitcoin pushes back to that new all-time high, that Ethereum pushes closer to $5,000, that liquidity is going to make its way to altcoins. I'm still in that belief, but right now we are just sitting ducks waiting for Bitcoin to make that move, and then we'll see what happens. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think is going to happen in November for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and altcoins. I'm going to read some of those comments to see where your thoughts are. As a whole right now, the community is thinking it's basically over. Sentiment's in the gutter, but when sentiment is in the gutter or at euphoria stages, the reverse usually happens. So I remain bullish. Let me know what you guys think. With that said, smash the like button if you're new and you want this bull market to continue. Obviously, subscribe if you're new to the channel. Check out our premium Discord. We do have that first link in the description below. You're going to get all of my thoughts and insights and what I do with my own money in that Discord. And with that being said, I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace.